Hey everyone, this is Donna Savage with Talk with Savage Desires, and tonight I have with me Vidal, Dr. Vidal, a counseling practitioner. Welcome, Vidal.
Hey, my pleasure to be here, Donna.
Listen, I know I had to chase you down to bring you on my program, but thank you for accepting
Chase
anyways.
me down, chase me down. I don't run as fast as Usain Bolt, so you could have caught up to me. I don't know what happened.
Yeah, well, I caught up to you, which is a good thing. So, Vidal, as I mentioned before, I kind of wanted to talk about the importance of touch.
Ah,
Touches, yeah. So, I mean, as soon as a baby is born, the first thing that they do to a parent is put this baby on a parent's skin to skin. That's how important touch is. And due
mhm.
to what the whole COVID situation is, and people are out of source from not touching or communicating or hugging, and I find that there's a lot of mental issues hanging around and going around. So, Dr. Vidal or Vidal, let me please explain how important it is for the touch.
Well, I'm of the mindset that sometimes, not all the time, sometimes touch is more important a form of communication than it is to actually speak. And we know that.
Mm-hmm.
For example, when someone has lost a loved one or they're grieving, we know that it's often easier to say nothing but just be present or just to hold someone.
Mm-hmm.
We know when we're babies and we fall off, when they cry, we hold them, touch. So we used to touch, but we don't take time to really appreciate the value of touch in our lives. We know when you fall off the bike, first thing we do, run to moms and dads and we say, we have a scrape and it's, what do? They hug us, they console us. So
Mm-hmm.
that touch. In business, we shake hands. When we meet our friends, we hug them because
Mm-hmm.
touch has it has a deeper meaning. It resonates with us in a deeper way. Something happens in our brain that allows us to be warm and make us feel connected and part of a community or just a sense of belonging. So
Mm-hmm.
touch is indeed important. Again, more important perhaps than sometimes the spoken word.
Mm-hmm. And it's so funny. I think a lot of people didn't realize how much or important touch is until the whole pandemic started. The
Mhm.
thought of not seeing their loved one or anyone. And I know a lot of research that I've been doing more so for a single person who's living on their own and don't have anyone to have that touch with or that communication is because what the pandemic caused us to do is to separate. So
Mhm.
there's no hugging. And as you said, I think it's one of the best thing. Touch does help in communication by not saying anything at all.
Mhm. And,
And I
and
go
and
ahead.
sometimes there are no words that can express how you feel,
Mm-hmm.
um, other than a touch or a hug or an
Mm-hmm.
embrace, right?
Okay, that's great. So I thought you would be the best person to talk about this topic. I was talking earlier to you about Tantra. Tantra is a big believer in touch,
Mm.
smell and touch. The simple fact that you can just close your eye or touch someone just inches away from the skin, this could be a huge turn on, solo or by partner. And I remember you and I had done an experiment where you kind of showed even your hand is like a couple inches from the skin and what exude and what the feeling comes from that. And I know when we touch someone, I mean, you're in the medical field, we exude what? Oxytocin, the feel good
Yeah,
chemicals.
serotonin, all those good hormones that we want in our bodies, want to come through our brains, our bodies to feel good. They're
Mm-hmm.
natural, they're healthy, they stimulate us, they make us feel good. It's like working out, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or being in love and all of what goes on in our bodies and our minds. Um, it's those good, healthy hormones that stimulate us, and touch does that.
Mm-hmm.
Touch does that in a miraculous way. The research is clear. In England, as a matter of fact, I was listening to a show last year where they talked about seniors in England and the government having special programs through the NHS where they had individuals who go out and actually meet seniors in their homes. And they're just there to interact with them, to show them that someone cares, and to touch them. We know what happens when one is in hospital and might be in coma, the power of touch that might revive that person. And so when we talk about if I'm going to unpack it, in our fingers, so our senses are all the senses. So we emit or we experience sensorial stimulation from them, particularly in
Mhm.
our fingers, in our hands, but not exclusively. When we touch another person, there's something on our skin, these nerve endings that are not necessarily visible to the eye, but they're called galvanic receptors, and they pick up um, those those faint touches that aren't actual touches, but they pick up that sensation of being touched. And what that does is it stimulates the individual. So um, babies reach out for your finger, and once they are getting there, they're excited, then they grab it and they hold on tight.
Mhm.
All of those galvanic receptors send messages to our brain, to our pleasure centers, that just lights us up, that makes us happy.
Mhm.
Right?
Mhm.
And and so when the more of that we can do, the better it is. The more that we can touch, the more that we can hug, and of course within boundaries and being respectful about that, the better that we feel. And so some of us in my practice will talk about the importance of getting 5 or 10 hugs a day, right? And
Mhm.
what that does for an individual,
Mhm. But
because it's
although
true, it does make us feel good.
yeah, you're given this 5 or 10 hugs per day, but how long would the should the hug last? I mean, you can't just go around and just give a, and you're gonna get any receptives off of that. I think it has to be a good minute or two in order for you to have that,
Well,
as you said. This,
it all depends on how well you know the other person.
you know what I mean.
Some hugs can be quite long if you
Like
want them to be. So no, no, in all seriousness, again, depending on the person who they are and what they say they need. Right? There's
Mhm.
some people, as you know, particularly women, are very good at this. They will go home to their companions, their mates, their life mates, and they will say, "Look, I just need a hug. I just need a hug.
Mhm.
Don't say anything. I just need to be touched. I need to be held. I need to be. I need someone to feel me and feel my body, and I need to be felt." That's the
Mhm.
power of communication. That's saying, I don't want to talk. There are words that can't express what I need right now, but touch will do that, and do that in a way that satisfies me.
I so agree with you. It's funny that you brought up about that research that is happening in England. There's a girl that I follow on one of the social media, and that's her job. Like she became a millionaire just by going around and hugging people, because people have this preconceived notion. A lot of times they have confusion that they wanted sex or just intimacy, and a lot of persons are always going around having sex, but they're still not satisfied, realizing that that's not what they really need, but they just need the powerful touch or hug, to just stimulate serotonin or dopamine,
Mhm,
just that feel good thing.
mhm,
And I think right now where we are in society, that we need to start hugging more. And as you said, let's talk and more hugging, because we talk about communication all the time, but sometimes our most communication is not being communicated well.
mhm,
So you know
mhm.
what, just shut up and just hug me and just let's carry
Yeah,
on.
yeah.
Let's
Well,
carry on the feel good moments, right?
well, I often ask, couples when I'm working with them, tell me about the best form of communication that they've seen, around them, that happens on a day-to-day basis. And many people do not get it, and some people, the few people who get it, understand why. It's nonverbal, just like touching is nonverbal.
Mm-hmm.
I think the best example, the best evidence we have of communication in our society are all those people who drive the roads every day. When you think about the thousands of people who get in cars, these
Mm-hmm.
2,000 pound machines, some of them 4,000 pound machines, and drive the road, and the ratio of accidents to the number of drivers, you have to say, well, something's going right. And yes, there's driver training and so on.
Mm-hmm.
But what happens is that we naturally have inculcated in our psyche this idea of communicating without talking, and you can't, unless you're in a rag top, you can't, right? Or you can wind your window down and communicate differently depending on what it is. But for the most part, people get home and get home relatively safely, even when they're fender benders, front bumpers, whatever,
Mhm, mhm.
fender benders. That's it.
It came,
You know,
yeah.
they, so So, and even in those moments, those are examples of where communication did not work well, but they're few and far between. For
Mhm.
the most part, we communicate relatively well. We signal,
Mhm.
we break, we allow others to pass in front of us, and we all follow it. We all conform. But it so happens when it comes to relationship, we forget those rules.
We do.
We go to, you know, Starbucks or Starsucks, depending on who you are and what you like, coffee or not coffee, and whatever else. Tim Hortons, and they put their best communicators at the kiosk, and it's short, it's crisp, but they communicate for the most part relatively well. You get your order and you leave. We don't take it the next level and say to ourselves, well, wait, we don't always have to talk to each other. We can sometimes just be present with one another. We can touch, feel each other, sense each other,
Mhm.
and know that we're still communicating.
Mhm.
Whether we're communicating joy, or we're communicating connectedness, or communicating community, right?
Mhm. I like what you just said, and for those who are probably watching this and saying, Vidal have no idea what he's saying because it sounds so easy,
Mm,
which it's supposed to be because as humans we over analyze so much that it becomes more complicated than easy.
yeah.
Because we, as I'm going to talk about the feminine aspect of thing or the female things, right? We can calculate. You may say one word, and we may calculate it to mean in 2,000 different words. And what you say is what you said. But because like communication, when we're talking about communication, we don't know, as species, we really don't know how to communicate very well
Mhm.
because
Yeah.
you may say something and we may misconstrue it to something else. And so I really like the part that you said, just even a simple hug by not
Mhm.
saying anything. I think it's a better form of communication.
Yeah.
But then yeah,
Or it makes communication go a whole lot easier.
easier. Mm-hmm.
Right? Just imagine, couples sitting down and they've got a tense conversation to have, but they start the conversation by embracing one another, or
Mm-hmm.
they start the conversation by sitting down and they're holding hands. It makes a huge difference. It's hard to be mad and angry and yell and scream at somebody you're holding hands with, right?
I know. I know. Or
It
come in and
just
say,
tempers everything down.
it's true. It is true. Or come in and say, Vidal, we need to talk.
Yeah, exactly.
Your antenna is going to go up.
Absolutely. And I'm going to say, who, me? You want to talk to me? Well, it must be somebody else because you can't be talking to me like that,
Oh
right?
my God.
If you came in and you said, baby, come over here,
Mm-hmm.
give me a hug. Look, I want to talk to you about something. Guess what? More than likely, I am going to say, okay, I may not want to have this conversation, but it's better than having it 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock in the morning. So let me have it right now, right? I'm now more engaged.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Because you've touched me, because you've engaged me differently other than through your vocal cords or through a request or a demand or a command.
Mm-hmm.
Communicated you have a need in a way that resonates with me, and I, in turn, reciprocate. I compliment you.
You mentioned that you do. I know you do a lot of counseling because you're also a counseling practitioner. But to say all of that to say couples, and what's your thought on the love languages? I'm sure you've heard about the 5 different love languages out there. And number one of the people take this test and people come back and say communication, right? But this what is communication to you? What does
Okay, so
communication
so,
mean?
so and we use that word ubiquitously. This kind of all in the
Mm-hmm.
basket. You know, here it is, communication.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think we don't really unpack it. So when people say that to me, I ask them, well, what do you mean by communication? You
Mm-hmm.
know, that great big amorphous communication. What does that mean? Tell me what it means. And when you break it down to people, they begin to tell you, well, essentially, I want to be heard. I
Mm-hmm.
want to convey an idea or a message, and I want to be heard. Or I
Mm-hmm.
have a need. I have the need for that person to be vulnerable, to be expressive. So you break down communication into basic components related to one's need. And so vulnerability, being expressive, um, being intimate, sharing of your most dark secrets with another person, feeling safe, feeling competent to express an idea without being vilified or negated, or or put down. So
Mhm.
communication isn't just this big umbrella that's out there. It's more than that when you talk to the individual person, and it's different for people. But we never get to that. We just say, well, he's not communicating. Well, what does that mean?
Mhm.
What specific do you want him to communicate about? What is it that you need? Tell him then. And I often find that one of the biggest flaws when we talk about communication is we don't talk about vulnerability. We don't talk about vulnerability because vulnerability takes risk.
Mhm.
It requires you to be emotionally naked
Mhm.
and exposed.
Yeah, and a lot
But
of
in
people
order
don't
to
want to
do
do
that,
that.
you
Mhm.
have to feel trust. You have to
Mhm.
feel a sense of belonging, that you are connected with someone who will keep what you share safe, protected. Um, and so we don't do enough to unpack what communication is, other than, well,
Don't.
he or she doesn't communicate, and that's all
Mhm.
there is. Well, that's what does that mean?
Mhm. So, Dr. Vidal, you ever have an instance when you're doing your coaching or your session, because I hear a lot what you're saying, and I find that, do you find that people, especially if they ask what communication mean, or if you ask them, so what's the issue, you find that they don't even know what the issue is, and because if they don't know what the issue is, you can't, it's going to be hard for them to communicate anyways, or tell the person what's going on. You know that you have a whole bunch of emotions going on, but you can't pinpoint it.
Right. And so when that happens, it's important to really try and go deeper and ask,
Mm-hmm.
well, and we don't do that enough. We jump to assumptions. We don't ask questions enough. Well, what do you mean?
Mm-hmm.
What are you thinking? What is it like?
Mm-hmm.
How do you feel? We don't ask enough questions. So people may start off saying, well, communication. Well, okay, so what does that mean?
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's I just mean you don't communicate. Okay, well, what specifically am I not communicating about, or what is it that you're looking for that
Mm-hmm.
I'm not giving to you? Tell me what that is. And you see, once you begin to, it's a technique he called, I think it's called the 5 whys or the 9 whys, the 9 whys. And you just keep on asking questions. Just keep
Mm-hmm.
asking questions like an interrogator, or it's an
Mm-hmm.
interrogative. And you'll find that when you ask the right questions repeatedly, repeatedly, and you stay the course, the person gets to a place where they say, okay, this is what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, aha, okay, now I know what you mean. Okay, so let's start there. But it takes some unpacking.
And
But
the
to
right
do that, the person
questions.
they have to feel safe. They have to
Mm-hmm.
feel that what's being said is not only protected, but is also going to be honored, not used against them.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So you have
Mm-hmm.
to cultivate an environment and a culture of relating to another that makes it safe and comfortable for a person to risk
Mm-hmm.
telling you how they're feeling.
Mm-hmm.
Because if they do, the risk is you can use that knowledge and those emotions against a person. Nobody wants that.
Exactly. Exactly. And I think that's why a lot of people decided not to say anything, because obviously they don't trust them. But the thing about it is, and I noticed that this happens in committed relationships a lot, especially long-term committed relationships. You're going through your issues, and you're not speaking to your partner about what's going on. Like, it's like, to me, I'm not going to go on my own emotion. Can I can get emotional? And let's just, I'm going to be
Yeah,
very,
good. Yeah, yes.
yeah, but you know what? So I find that persons don't speak on emotion, as you said, because of they're vulnerable. And most oftentimes, this is in, we're talking long-term relationships. As you said earlier, as if they forgot why they met in the first place, and now all of a sudden you're holding on to so much things that's going on into your life, and you keep holding on. And I'm going to say that happens most oftentimes with men, especially if they're going through whatever midlife crisis, whatever issues, that they're holding on to that and not divulging what's going on with them and the wife. And here comes the female part of thing in her head, thinking and coming up with all different scenarios why he's acting this way. Right. And I guess that's why it all comes back into what you're saying about effectiveness of communications. Right.
Well, and again, I would go deeper than just saying communication. I think we have a culture and we have a society where men have been conditioned in part and learned, and it's changing to not speak at an emotional level because it's not
Mm-hmm.
manly. You know, you're
It's
weak,
true.
you're a sissy, or some
That
other
is
kind
true.
of euphemism. And so men grew up in that environment as boys and get into relationships and continue that practice, not in all instances, but to a certain degree. But relationships require you to relate to another.
Mm-hmm.
And so I remember having a client uh, in a couple in my office. They were talking, and she was saying he doesn't say anything to me, doesn't talk to me, doesn't express an idea. So I asked him, "What's going on?" He says, "Well, I'm not a communicator." I'm thinking, well, why don't they get married? I didn't say that, but I thought to myself, well, why get married? You know,
Mm-hmm.
because relationships require you to shed some things of yourself in trade or in exchange for what the other will give you. So if you're not a quote communicator, it means that you have to begin to be a communicator for the other person
Mm-hmm.
in some way, shape, or form. You have
Mm-hmm.
to try, and vice versa. Those who communicate too much have to find ways of measuring and managing the level of communication so that the other person feels comfortable and not overwhelmed,
It's
right?
true. That
So
is
it
true.
it's a delicate balance moving forward, but getting into a relationship, getting into a state where you talk about communication requires one to be vulnerable. You
You
have
have
to be
to be
vulnerable.
vulnerable. Yeah.
You have to be vulnerable. If you want to love and experience love, you have to be vulnerable. By being vulnerable, you experience the optimal state of love and a loving relationship
Mm-hmm.
because it brings you to a place where you're emotionally naked, transparent, and you're giving of yourself. And likewise, the other person is doing the same thing for you.
I like everything that you just said. And wow. Question for you: is kissing a form of touch and communication?
To kiss someone, oh, absolutely,
Mm-hmm.
absolutely. It lightens up our lives. You know, it makes us happy. Think about when we kiss a baby, or we get a kiss from a grandma or from a companion, a life mate.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it is confirming. It's a confirmation of our relationship. It's a
Mm-hmm.
confirmation of how we connect, and it's not necessarily associated with sex, though it can be,
It can be, yeah.
right? It's a confirmation that you and I are connected to one another, and we're
Mm-hmm.
connected to one another in a deep way, in an intimate way
Mm-hmm.
that others around us may not have that privilege. So I have a granddaughter. So when I meet her, I kiss her. I say, "Give Grandpa a kiss." She kisses me on the cheek, and for me, that fills my soul,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so, but that's our way of connecting, right?
It's true kissing.
Yeah, most absolutely. And in
Mm-hmm.
that, and what are we kissing? We're kissing the most tender parts of our body, our cheeks, where the membrane is thin. So the
Mm-hmm.
nerve endings are right there, popping out right there, and
Mm-hmm.
immediately send messages to our brain. When we kiss on the lips, well, that is why we get a hot kiss or a wet kiss or whatever you want to call it, right? It's like, wow, this is powerful. Stars go off, right?
What
Because it
about a
sends,
what about a forehead kiss?
ah, the forehead kiss,
Mm-hmm.
one of affection,
Mm-hmm.
one of caring, something that a grandparent would do or a parent would do that says, "I love you, I care about you, and I want you to know."
Mm-hmm. A grandparents or a parents. I like that. I have one of my clients, her boyfriend at the time of 4 years, didn't know how to tell her that he was leaving her. And he kissed her on her forehead and said, "I'll talk to you later." So all these years, it's always lips and cheeks, never a forehead kiss.
Mm.
And there's a dictionary, I think it's called Urban Dictionary, that you went and Google forehead kiss, relationship forehead kiss. I don't know what word she put in. I told her that her man is saying goodbye to her. So I was just curious about this forehead kiss. For me, I think a forehead kiss is very romantic. But nowadays, as you said, things are changing. Like people are putting so many different meanings behind so many different things. So I was just curious to know about the forehead
Yeah,
kiss.
I think it's just another way of expressing affection.
That was what I thought too.
That's what it. I mean, there are all sorts of, you know, definitions of what it might be, but I think it's just another way of expressing affection for another person, and not necessarily saying goodbye.
Right? It's like, okay, so let me ask about this because I'm thinking this is new on me because you're hip and you're up to the new changes. I mean, so let me ask you about the forehead because if it means that goodbye and
No,
don't talk to me again.
no, if you've ever been kissed in the forehead, and I would imagine that very few men have unless they're sitting down because most men are taller. But if that happens, for the most part, it's a sign of affection. It's a sign
Right?
that you and I are bonded together in a way that is and could be romantic, but
Mm-hmm.
also not romantic. But it's a sign
Right?
of affection. It's saying, I care about you. You're
Mm-hmm.
important to me.
So let's kissing. Let's say a long-term relationship. We're gonna be killing all this couple and long-term relationship. If our couples are together for a while and less kissing start happening. I mean, before we're passionate, we're always kissing on the lips. Even a peck on the lips, and now kissing's finish.
Mhm.
Can we build a story behind that? Saying maybe one of the partners are not feeling decided going on with something else emotionally, or we can just build up one story that he's cheating and he's not kissing me anymore, or I
Well,
have bad breath.
could it be all of that or the above? All of the above. No, I think in those cases, it's less about the kiss and
Mm-hmm.
more about what has changed in the relationship, that the kiss is no longer happening.
Mm-hmm.
And often the case is, short of it being, halitosis or some other relationship or something else going on, for the most part, something else has happened in the relationship that has caused that practice to cease. And
Mm-hmm.
so it becomes important to explore that. Why?
Mm-hmm.
Why did that
Mm-hmm.
happen? We used to do this before. Why did it happen?
What happened? What
But it
happened?
doesn't mean that it can't be resurrected, because sometimes some things you just practice and you bring it back into practice. You make it part of your day to day routine and repertoire, whether it
Mm-hmm.
be a kiss leaving for the office or for work, or kiss coming in. A bit different with COVID. You could be doing a whole lot of kissing while working at home together, a couple, but you get my drift,
Among
right?
other things, but okay.
Right. But I think it's more reflective of what's happening in the relationship, why it stopped, like anything else.
Like
And
everything
so the
else, yeah.
conversation is then about, well, what is it telling us? Why did this happen? What is it
Mm-hmm.
telling us? What's behind it? That's the
Mm-hmm.
digging deeper. That's the asking the five W's, the five whys. Why? Why?
Why?
What happened? Where
Mm-hmm.
did it go? Why
Mm-hmm.
are we doing this?
But a lot of times, don't you believe that people? For me, I think people should start paying attention more often and ask a question right away, and don't like weeks or months pass on before addressing the issues. Because if you're paying attention, you can know when the changes start happening.
Yeah.
Yes,
No,
right.
absolutely. And I would say in that example you gave me where, the kissing isn't happening anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Fundamentally, I believe that relationships are built on needs. I think
Mm-hmm.
as much as love is important, love is not enough to sustain a relationship.
I
I think
agree.
there's some practices and there's some conditions around relationships that are featured around
Mm-hmm.
what we need to get out of the relationship to make us
Mm-hmm.
feel good about ourselves and feel good about the other person, feel good about the relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And so when things start to go awry, it's often about it's, it's not often about the absence of love or the lack of love. It's about an unmet need that is not that is no longer being facilitated. And so when that happens, what do you do about it? How do you engage in a conversation about it? How do you get into a conversation about what my needs are without this false equivalency that occurs? And that is, well, what about my needs? Well,
Mm-hmm.
I'm raising my needs now. You never raised yours until I raised mine. What's that about? Right?
Exactly.
But being truly open and mature um, in being open to receiving that feedback
Mm-hmm.
and talking about, okay, I hear you. Okay, what do you need? What can I do to make this different?
Yeah, let's
And
fix
having that
this.
mature conversation as adults who've
Mm-hmm.
decided to embark on a journey together.
Mm-hmm. Oh, Vidal, I want to thank you so much
Oh, we
that
finished
you.
already? You
It's
mean I can
30
go?
minutes. It's, you know what? We'll talk after. Vidal, thank you so much for joining me tonight. You have imparted so much important factor when it comes to touch and communication, and so we're definitely going to have a part two to this. I
Okay.
could sit and talk to you all night. It's your fault. I'm gonna say it right there on live.
Yeah, I wasn't the one. I wasn't the one away in a sunny country on vacation that just arrived back 3 hours ago. I was not the one, folks. It's not me. Don't look at me at all. I was
Listen,
prepped. I was ready.
listen. We're
Someone
gonna
was away
blame him,
enjoying
and
the
we're gonna
sun.
blame. We're always blaming him, man. So we're blaming him again tonight. Okay.
Sun and fun. Yes, right.
Thank you, Vidal, for joining me tonight. Again, tonight episode is just about touch and how important it is to touch. Find a friend, a family, anyone in your unspoken words is so much more important and so much more impactful than you know. This is
Mhm.
Donna Savage with Talk with Savage Desires. Have an awesome night.